The State of Agile with Scott Ambler.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies using Microsoft technologies, .NET Azure, to build mission-critical software systems, rescue failing projects, always empowering software delivery with a proven approach. I am excited to announce that my latest book is now fully released, not only in hardcover, softcover, Kindle, but also in audiobook in audible.com. It's about software leadership. It's called The 5 Pillars, Leadership for Effective Custom Software. And this book is for anyone who's attempting to make a custom software team highly effective. You can look at chapter 4 for Agile and DevOps content. And if you and your team, of course, everyone's interested in delivering world-class results, this book could be for you. And teams are also doing book studies and discussions around it, so I'm excited for that. And if you, dear listener, would like a complimentary electronic copy of the book, then you can just send me an email, and I'll be happy to get one for you. And for those of you who are in a lead architect or software executive role, you might be interested in joining our monthly forums. These are interactive, deeply technical sessions that I enjoy facilitating personally. They're peer groups. You can sign up for those on clearmeasure.com. Today, I have a guest on my show who has been around the Agile space for years and years, big leader in that space, Scott Ambler. He helps people and teams adopt new ways of working, his WOW or WOW methodology, and evolve their ways of thinking, WOT, particularly around data warehousing and data quality. He's the creator of the Agile Modeling, agilemodeling.com method, and Agile Data, agiledata.org methods. And with Mark Lyons, he co-created PMI's Disciplined Agile Toolkit. And as a conference keynote speaker, he speaks about continuous data warehousing, business intelligence, how to address enterprise data debt, how to succeed at corporate AI, and agile architecture, and many other topics. He's also co-authored several books, including Choose Your WOW, an executive guide to disciplined agile, refactoring databases, and agile modeling. Multiple books. And for a full list of those books, you can go to ambysoft.com/books. That's ambysoft.com/books. And we'll include all those links in the show notes. So, Scott, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm really good. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm excited to have you on. You've been a leader in the Agile space for a long time. And so many of my listeners, along with building and delivering .NET software and running it in Azure, have been using Agile and all the different flavors as well. And we talk about that a lot and the Agile influence on DevOps automation. But before we kind of jump into the topic of Agile, I always like to give the listeners a little information on the guest. And so could I back you up? I've introduced you already, but can I back you up and just, are there any clear moments in your career that kind of led you into working on what you're currently working on, that were like, linchpins in steering you down this direction?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I guess so. In some ways, I sort of stumbled through my career. I was always interested in learning and getting better. I was always interested in, answering the question, why does this work? Why doesn't it work? When would it work? When wouldn't it? Like those sorts of questions. And in the 90s, I was pretty heavy, doing a lot of heavy process work, CMM level 4 and 5 type stuff, and RUP, and RUP can be very lightweight. So everybody likes to pick on RUP, but it's long dead anyway. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But
the rational unified process.
Yeah. Thanks for correcting me. Rational unified process. And at the time, I was speaking at the software development conferences, and most of the people who became like the the writers of the Agile Manifesto were fellow speakers. So we were hanging out, and I was attending their classes and all that good sort of stuff. And I started paying attention to a lot of the lighter weight stuff. And I was lucky enough to spend time with Jim Highsmith, and he basically schooled me on the evils of CMM. And sure enough, he was right. And I was starting to notice those sorts of things myself. And when the Agile Manifesto was published, it really spoke to me, and I'd already been leaning that direction away. And that was when I started the Agile modeling method. And so I led the development of that. And that was basically at the time trying to answer the question, how do you approach modeling and documentation on an extreme programming project? And because that was a radical concept back then, right? Like, you got to remember, like, back in the day, modeling was done by these highly trained modelers with these incredibly expensive software-based modeling tools, and it was very complicated and all upfront, and there's a lot of really bad behaviors occurring. And a bunch of us came along and we said, well, wait a minute, no. If you step back and observe what happens, the modeling is mostly sketches on whiteboards. Some of us even use these really weird things called Post-it notes, which was radical back then. Like, everybody does it now, but that was radical. And Kent Beck was running around talking about index cards, modeling on index cards, right? So he didn't even have glue on his paper. So this was all very radical. And then a couple of years later, I started investigating the question, well, how do you approach database stuff in an Agile manner? Because I had a fairly deep background in data. I did data warehousing before it was called data warehousing and all that good sort of stuff. And a bunch of us inherently knew that if we couldn't solve that problem, Agile was going to go nowhere. Because if you were still stuck in doing this traditional heavy upfront data stuff, then who cares how fast the programmers are going if it takes you 6 months to add a column to a database, right? So we basically solved that problem. Now, it took the data community a long time to sort of catch up, and frankly, they're still catching up, which is where I'm working. The focus of my work has basically gone back to data ops and continuous data warehousing and just continuous data in general, because it really is more complicated. When you look at how do you make data ops work out, like, yes, we refactor, and yes, we do automated testing and continuous integration, continuous deployment, all these good sorts of things. But all those practices, in some cases, are an order of magnitude more complex when the database is involved. Right. And so this is pretty nasty. And we really do need, like, at the organization level, we really do need to figure this stuff out. And a lot of organizations still are. Like, the data folks have been given a pass in many ways up until just recently, and haven't really been asked to improve. And I think it's in the last 5 years, when data-driven decision-making or data-informed decision-making, however you want to call that, has become important in organizations, plus now AI, we're at the point now where we can't tolerate the data people fooling around anymore. Like, they got to up their game. And that means they got to move into a more continuous way of working, a more DevOpsy or data opsy type of way of working. And it's going to take them time. And we need better tooling, and better tooling is coming out without a doubt. But we really do need to up our game in the Agile data space, and that's what I've been focused on lately. So long story. Yeah.
And you also still lead conferences. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I still speak at conferences. I keynote, I give presentations. I'm probably not going to speak at it, but I am promoting the Agile2025 Conference coming up this summer in Denver. That historically has been a great conference. And they've got some pretty good topic tracks. We'll have to see what talks they actually get, but one of the tracks is AI. Is around AI and Agile software development, and so I'm hoping that track gets fleshed out a fair bit. And I hope they get a lot of good, solid presentation proposals, and have a really rough go of choosing speakers, because that's a good problem to have, right? Having far too many proposals than you know what to do with. So, but yeah, anyways, we'll see. I highly suspect it's going to be an awesome conference again.
Fantastic. We'll include a link to that in the show notes. How long do people have to submit their talks?
Good question. I believe at the end of the month, I think January 31st is the cutoff. Go to the site and look. Don't trust me, but I believe it's January 31st.
Well, one of your main websites is scottambler.com, and you've got a blog on there, and you have a recent article about the future of Agile. The future of
Say
Agile
it.
ain't.
You can say it.
Yeah. How do you say ampersand hashtag percent in audio?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. It's the article on this site on the Scott Ambler site is a TLDR. Too long didn't read version of three very detailed articles that I wrote for and published on LinkedIn in the fall. So So I'll say it. So it's referred to as my scatological series about Agile, and basically, the first article was titled, "The Agile Community Shat the Bed,"
Mm-hmm.
and basically, which got a lot of attention for some strange reason. And basically, I walked through some of the challenges. So the Agile community is in a real downturn, and it's probably not going to come out of it, at least not anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
So in the article, I talk about about the Agile Gold Rush and all these certification schemes where you attend a 2-day workshop and then suddenly pass a test that a house plant could get by, and suddenly you're a certified master.
Right.
And for some reason that blew up in their face. Who knows why, right? So, but there's various problems, and the challenge with the Agile community, and we were all part of it, right? Like we can point fingers as much as we want, but some of those fingers better be pointing back at ourselves. And I really think the challenges are we have these weird certification schemes that were meaningless for the most part. Like 99% of them were just meaningless. You had all these people they define transformation as if by adopting a framework. So adopt Scrum, adopt Safe, and suddenly you're an Agile organization. And that was just false.
Mm-hmm.
And then like other things, like there was a lot of focus on fluff and not stuff. If you know the all stuff, no fluff.
The no fluff, just stuff conferences.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the Agile community is all about. Like the soft people things are important without a doubt. But if you don't have the skills to get the job done, you're not useful, right? And I think, and this was the fundamental challenge with a lot of these Agile coaches and Scrum masters and others, where they weren't really offering value in the organization. Or if they were, then it wasn't measurable, it wasn't obvious. And if it's not measurable, if it's not obvious, then to management, to the people paying your salary, then you've got a serious problem. And sure enough, we've been seeing layoffs of Scrum masters and coaches because they just weren't providing value, or at least weren't measurably providing value.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've been let go. And it's virtually impossible now for people to get a job as an Agile coach or as an Agile as some sort of a Scrum master, because these organizations have figured it out and they don't want to. They need better. Like they want you to do things. They want you to get stuff done. They don't want you to just to stand around and pontificate about how awesome Agile is. So, like, the only real surprise is that the Agile Gold Rush lasted as long as it did. And so anyway, so we're in the trough. So then the second article in the series was entitled, "What can Agilists do after shatting the bed?" So, and that article was geared towards individual practitioners of, well, so now you're in trouble, right? You've got to find employment, or hold on to your job, as the case may be. And so what do you do? So I talked about things like, well, maybe you need to get out of the Agile world, right? There's too many people, right? Not everybody's going to make it into the lifeboat, and just maybe you're not one of them. And so move on, do something else, right? And give up on your dreams of being a Scrum Master, or whatever your dreams were. In other cases, I was saying, well, wait a minute. Why don't you up your game and become an enterprise designer? Now, we don't need a lot of them. I guess that's not a huge job. That's not a huge job pool, but it is important. It does need to be done, and it is a pretty good career. So, but you need the skills. It's not just attending a 2-day course and declaring yourself a master.
Mm-hmm.
You need years of experience, and you need to understand change management, design, and many, many other things. So, I talked about things like that. And then in the third article, where I said, the future of Agile, isn't shit. What I was basically talking about there was, well, how do I see the future? And I think part of the future is we need to move beyond manifestos, right? Like everybody, we're still hung up on the Agile Manifesto. And that was written in 2001 by a bunch of very smart people who were describing how to solve the problems of the late 1990s.
Right.
And we solved those problems. They're long gone, right? Like, we've dealt with it. And if you read the manifesto now, it sounds sort of old fashioned. Like, it talks about how we might release software every few months. Really? How about every few minutes?
Right.
So,
Right.
we really have moved past that. And I also talk about, I think we should get back to our roots and focus more on software development, but like the stuff, not just the fluff, because we do need the skills to get the job done. But at the same time, we need to look beyond software development. So a lot of good work has been done in non-software areas and will continue to. And I think we need to respect that. And I think we need to just recognize it's going to continue to happen anyway. So, and that's good, right? So we can have some people focusing on solid software stuff, some people focusing on non-software stuff. It's all good. And we shouldn't be fighting about this. Like I still come on, it's like 14 years later or 15, almost 15 years later. And no, my math's wrong. 14 years later, and people are still arguing, oh, Agile's just for software. Come on, just open your eyes. Not for 24, 20. Man, my math is bad.
That's right.
24 years later, and here we are, and people are still arguing it's just for software development. Grow up, move on, right? And this is part of the problem with the Agile community, right? It's like they don't they preach about embracing change, but they don't really embrace change, right? So anyways, so that's a bit harsh, but it is what it is. But we also need to put these techniques into context, right? Like we've got to stop talking about best practices. That's marketing nonsense. It really is. Any given practice or strategy or technique, whatever you want to call it, is good in some situations and not so good in others, right? I've spent my career looking for best practices. I've had thousands of strategies pitched to me as best practices.
Mm-hmm.
I have yet to run into one. And what I mean by that is a practice is truly best when it works in all situations and doesn't really mess you up. But any given practice I've ever seen works well sometimes. Other situations, it's the kiss of death, right? So you really need to, it's like a hammer, right? I can use a hammer to build something really, really beautiful and unique, or I can use a hammer to smash things and everything in between, right? So, use the technique for the right thing, for the situation that you find yourself in. And sometimes a hammer is just not what you need, right? Like if I had a scratch on a pane of glass, I don't think I can use like other than to smash the glass, get rid of it. I don't think there's anything that I can do with a hammer, right? So the hammer is a wonderful tool in some situations.
Well, could I ask you a finer point on that? When you define best practice, all scenarios, in your view, is it literally all, or is it more 80-20? Like if it works in 80% of the cases, is it valid to say, hey, this is a best practice because it meets the 80% mark?
It's still because then you can start arguing, well, is it 81% or is it really 79%? I don't want to get into those arguments. It's like, because how do you measure it, right? So it's like, so instead of, and frankly, you embarrass yourself talking about best practices, right? So just say it's a practice. And it's and so what I would rather see is here's a practice. Here's what it is. Here's the advantages of doing this. Like, why would you want to do this? Here's the disadvantages of doing this. Here's the downsides. And then here's where we've seen it work. And maybe even here's where we've seen it not work, right? If you want to be blunt about it. And in many ways, this reflects the patterns thinking. If you look at, old school patterns like 20, 30 years ago, then they were put in a context, right? And they talked about the forces, and here's the situation you need to be in for this pattern to be effective. Here's the context. Do this. And then once you do this, now here's the new situation that you're in. Here's the new context, right? Because something's changed. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, and that's okay, right? And then the idea is what's the next, what's a pattern that you could put in to fix to address this new situation that you're in. So I think and we've sort of lost that because everybody wants to, pitch these new ideas, and they're very seldom are they new, anyways. And they're, it's people just use new terminology to describe old techniques, and they might not even know that these techniques existed, right? Like, that's the other thing that drives me nuts is that it's like, what, an idea gets pitched and that's great, and then I say, well, do you realize that, we were doing this in web services 15 years ago. We were doing this in client server 7 years, and it was all like different names and slightly different flavors of the same basic the same basic concept. So, and that's okay, right? But still, know your history as best you can, and put things in a context. And then I eventually talk about how we're not going to have a new Agile gold rush. So that's all over. Now, there is an AI gold rush going on at the present moment, and a lot of people jump on that bandwagon. But good luck. I think there's, but anyways, we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, there's not going to be any, if you're going to sit back and hope that all these Agile certification schemes are going to come to a roaring, come back in a roaring, it's not going to happen, right? So don't hold your breath for any of that. But anyways, and that's okay. So it's Agile has a good future. It's different than what it was, and I honestly hope that we step up and make Agile solid again, right? Like, if you look at the early days of Agile, it really was about better engineering and better, working together more effectively, and better quality and all that good sort of stuff. And unfortunately, the business people came along and wanted to make lots and lots of money selling certifications, and then it got messed up from there. So it really is sort of unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, in the end, people don't ever want a drill, but they want a hole. And so, let me buy a drill. I can make a hole. People don't want a methodology, but they do want successful software projects. They do want to have the internal ability to build some software, to change some software, and it actually happen and not break the software. So that's the desire. And so, in your opinion, how should people be thinking of it in today?
Well, you still need a way of working and ways of thinking, right? So the challenge is, I don't want to blame process, but I do want to blame inappropriate process. And so I think what happens is, when you look for best practices, when you look for these defined processes, you're basically asking, just tell me what to do, right? And this is why some of these methods were so popular, because they were perceived as, you just tell me what to do, right? So you've got this complex problem that you need to solve. You're overwhelmed. You probably don't know what you're doing, and you certainly don't know how to organize enough people that with a clue to get the job done. So you look for these simple recipe books to tell you what to do. Tell me how to run this huge program. Well, safe is one way of doing that, but maybe that's a good solution for you. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I don't know your context, but you probably don't know your context either, and you probably don't have the capability to make that decision. And yet you're still making it. So, because you're overwhelmed, what are you going to do? So the real solution is to know what you're doing, right? To build teams out of people who have the skills and have the experience to do whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And then that team needs to identify how it's going to work together, right? Because everybody's unique, and you always face a unique problem. You've got a unique group of people who are unique themselves. So you need to figure out, here's how we're going to work. And I've got strengths, you've got strengths. I want to achieve something, you want to achieve something. So we really, and things will change over time anyways. So we really need to be constantly working on identifying what's our best way of working now for the situation that we face. And doing all that in an environment where we're probably not process experts. I hope you don't want to be a process expert. It's a horrible thing. And I would consider myself a process expert. So, don't do that.
Sure.
Anyways.
My listeners want to code. They want to write code.
Yeah. You want to write code, but at the same time, you want to write the right code. You want to write quality code, and you want to do something of value. You need to do so in an environment, in whatever environment you're in. Whatever it is that you're doing today needs to fit in, right? And I hope you're mature enough to want to build maintainable and high quality code that's going to stand the test of time, because somebody else will have to maintain it.
Right.
Even if it's you, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse than coming back to your own code like 6 months later, 12 months later, and what the heck was I thinking? And that's your own code.
And cursing myself.
Yeah. Let alone the crap that the person over 3 cubes over, or on the other side of the planet wrote, right? So, we need to understand that as professionals, we need to produce good work, and it needs to fit in. Like there's way too much of reinvention of the wheel. Like I've worked in organizations where you've got two teams like just down the hall from each other, and they're working on the same thing because there isn't any sort of coherent portfolio management,
Right.
or their bosses are playing political games and they're trying to get the thing out the door first because
Yeah.
get a bonus or something. There's always some nonsense going on, right? And we need to do better than that. We really do. And I see teams that they'll play with, and I love it. I do it too. They'll play with new technology simply to build their resume, simply for the joy of figuring something out. When existing stuff works, and you could have done that same work much faster, just leveraging the 99% of the stuff you've already got built and just tweaking it as opposed to doing a rewrite or
Mm-hmm.
building something reasonably new because there's some new technology stack that you want to play with.
Yeah.
So I think we can do a lot better, and the technical debt is horrendous in these organizations, and including data debt. That's where I like to focus, but we've got to stop, and we've really got to start doing better than we are, and that also requires better behavior from the business, right? We really do need to help them understand what it is that we do and how we do it, and the implications of their decisions. And we need to get better at pushing back. So when somebody comes to us and wants us to meet some ridiculous date, and the only way to do that is to create more technical debt, we've really got to push back against that, because more than likely the ridiculous date isn't real.
Yeah.
And second, they don't understand the implications of what they just asked for, because
Mm-hmm.
nobody's ever bothered to tell them, and probably nobody's ever stood up to the vice president of some division that continually asks for this nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Well, you commented on the Agile certification industry and training and whatnot, but just to kind of level set to make sure we understand what your position is when it comes to the 4 principles and the 4 values and the 12 principles in the Agile Manifesto itself. In your opinion, are there any that didn't play out and should be discarded, or are they just solid ideas but they're now just normal? What's your view on that?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think it's some of them need to be updated. As earlier, I was talking about how we talk about releasing software every few months. Well, okay, obviously that the principle is solid, just the numbers could be updated, right? So there's stuff like that.
Okay.
But what I think if you look at the manifesto, though, is it was written by software developers for software developers, which is great, but that's not really our scope anymore. So our scope is, so a couple of important points. First, we've learned a few things since 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the contents of the manifesto, we won. Like, it's just normal. Like, this is the way we work for the most part. So, just doing an update simply because of that makes sense. But also the scope is different now. We are applying Agile outside of just software. Like look at the DevOps movement, for example. Like they brought ops in, right? So right there, like I'd be hard pressed to find organizations that weren't doing DevOps, or at least doing their best, some sort of DevOpsy thing. Right?
Well, and the original name that didn't last very long was Agile System Administration, but that title was boring, so Patrick Dubois got convinced to change it to DevOps.
Yeah. So and that's it. But we're also applying Agile and Lean concepts in the data space, in many other and far beyond IT. So we really need to bring some of those realities in, and the Agile Manifesto doesn't. And it's I'm not dinging the manifesto here, right? It's it's a fantastic, one of probably the most important artifact in software engineering, but it doesn't reflect some of the realities of long-term development, right? It's there in like long-term IT. So maybe it's a little weak on architecture. Maybe it's a little weak on addressing technical debt. Certainly weak on the issues around data. So not a lot of UX, sort of implied UX stuff or CX stuff. But so anyways, there's an opportunity to update it. Now, having said that, I can't imagine doing an update. At the 10-year anniversary point, a bunch of us got together potentially to do an update, and we were all over the board. Couldn't agree. It was a great weekend at Snowbird. We had a blast, great learning experience. But the only thing that came out of it was that there was no possible way to update the manifesto. And then here we are, like 14 years, another 14 years later, and it's even bigger. Like the scope is expanded more. There's several thousand people that think they should have a say in it, and fair enough, they should. Perhaps the 20th anniversary event a few years ago, organized by Scott Severite and a few others, fantastic worldwide event. A couple hundred presentations. Several of them were on, here's how we would update the manifesto. Those talk went exactly nowhere.
Yeah.
Right. And for the same reason that the 10-year anniversary didn't work out either, people can't agree. So anyways, my money would be on, have at it, try to rewrite the manifesto. Nobody will agree on it.
Right.
It'll be simple. And some of us, like myself and Mark Lyons, we co-wrote the Discipline Agile Manifesto a few years ago, right? So there's absolutely nothing stopping people from writing their own manifestos. Been there, done that, but who cares, right? So, at the end of the day, the concept of a manifesto was appropriate back then. Because it's a timing issue, right? But writing a new manifesto now, who cares, right? And so many people have, right? There's dozens of updated Agile manifestos out there if you go poking around, or extended manifesto. Like there's an Agile marketing manifesto, which is great, good piece of work. But good for them.
It seems like, to me, the follow on would be an extension of the first sentence on agilemanifesto.org. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. And through this work, we have found that, and then all these design patterns, or here's all these practices that we've discovered that did help us do a good job with software. And so now that practice is another tool in my tool belt, and I pull it out when I'm in a situation where I think it would help again.
Exactly. And many people have argued that the first sentence of the manifesto is actually the zeroth value. So, we're getting into Asimov's law of robotics. And you start talking about the zeroth law or the zeroth value.
But it's the premise. We want to do a good job at software.
It is, yeah. But then the challenge is you end up with hundreds or more than likely thousands of practices and patterns and techniques. So how do you find them? How do you organize them? So if you look at Essence, the CMAT effort, Essence, that's effectively a database of practices and strategies. And Scrum at Scale is in there. Scrum is in there. The Lean, a bunch of Lean stuff. There's a bunch of great material in there, but you'd still have to use it. You'd still have to do the work of pulling your ingredients to make your recipe out. Same thing in Discipline Agile, right? We had 1,700 practices, and they still, I still do. It's not a past tense thing, but you'd have to have the skill to do it. You'd have to do the work, and it gets back to your earlier point. People just want to write software. They don't want to be, doing some sort of process definition workshop thing for a few, even if it's just a few hours. They'd rather be banging out code, right?
Yeah.
And then even if they did define a process, are they going to follow it? Probably not.
Yeah.
Are they ever going to look at it again? Probably not.
Yeah. Well, you stuck with the process consultant, and like you said, process expert. And in the mid 2000s, I did a stint, I did the certifications. I called myself an Agile coach, and I was an independent consultant for a while. And they actually improved because of that. But then I turned more practitioner of actually delivering software, and that's what I've been doing ever since. But the thing that stuck with me is I'm one of the guys that says Agile is just normal. Let's just apply the thinking to everything. And what I've found is it gives a language, and I use the language of the 12 principles when I'm talking with a client, and I see, wait a minute, regardless of how you're going about doing this, we're missing this way of thinking. Like the whole principle about simplifying and maximizing the amount of work not done. I found too many times that a backlog is built with a series of hypotheses that will accomplish a business outcome, and then the software team is just going forward, building a bunch of features as if these hypotheses have already been proven. and no introspection that, wait a minute, hold on, we're halfway through this list and maybe one of these is invalidated. Or has anybody gone and checked back because maybe some of these are wrong?
Yeah, or do they make sense together, right? Like individually, they might all be great, but together it's a dog's breakfast.
Right.
I see that all the time, right? And this is, and you can almost always tell. Like you'll see software, and there'll just be featureitis across it, and you'll be like, "What the heck? Where did all this garbage come from?" And it's because, it's like every 2 weeks they delivered something new, and they just kept adding in and adding in and adding in with no sort of concept of any sort of customer experience, or if there wasn't a good job. But yeah, it's like it's just incoherent, and it doesn't help anybody. And these products tend to die, like just under their own weight.
Well, as we kind of close up here, there's some things that seem to have staying power, a high level of adoption, and you mentioned extreme programming, the notion of an automated build. Widely adopted practice, adopted practice, and doing different levels of automated testing, and I mean, there's certain practices like that have been widely adopted, regardless if they're like, to meet that definition of unanimous or ubiquitously applicable, your best practice, they're widely adopted. With your focus on data ops, and I'm thinking, the corollary of, okay, how do we make it change? What is the concept of a build, or how do these practices apply in data ops? Could you, for listeners who aren't familiar with that, are there some practices that maybe you wouldn't label them best practice, but they have gotten widely adopted and you reach for them quite often?
Yeah, so they're not as widely adopted as I would hope. And I think it's due to a lack of tooling. The data community has really sort of struggled. Like, if you look at like the normal DevOps community, those people, they're programmers. There's a lot of programmers, at least.
Yeah.
And they've got the skills to build their own tools, right? So what happens with developers is, when you don't have a tool, like you want to do something and the tool doesn't exist to do it, or you have issues with the existing tools, what do? You build your own tools, right? The data folks have never really had that level of skill up until recently with AI. So now they're doing some interesting stuff with large language models. But that's limited as well, right? Because you still need some harder core stuff to do. But anyway, so the tooling has not been the greatest in the data community for a long time. It's getting a lot better now, but up until recently, it hasn't. So having said that, a technique like database refactoring, like to do code refactoring, it's built into every IDE now. It's a no brainer, right? But back in the day, like mid to late '90s, it was pretty rough.
Search and replace.
Yeah, you do a global search and replace, and you'd shoot yourself in the foot, and you'd have to go. So it was a mess. Now you just want to rename an operation.
Yep.
Done. Right. So because it's all the tools have been built. But if I wanted to rename a column in a database, and this is my I've been running on this example for 20 years now. It's embarrassing, but it's embarrassing because I can still get away with it. If I go into your organization and I ask you, I want you to rename a column in your customer table in your production database, and I want you to roll that change into production by the end of the day.
Yeah, not going to happen for most
not
people.
And, well, if you're a really small organization, sure, right? Yeah, so I'll get like half-assed answers like that. But Bank of America, like a real organization, right? So, and the answer is no, and they'd be deathly afraid of that. So imagine, right? These are professionals that are deathly afraid of making an absolutely trivial change.
Yep.
And renaming a column, that is trivial. I can't find anything like it's the most trivial example I can come up with.
I bet you they'd be afraid of. I bet you they'd be afraid of extending the length of the customer last name column.
Yeah. Because who knows what that's going to break, right? And so so for all the nonsense around data quality techniques over the last 40 or 50 years, if you're afraid of doing something absolutely trivial, you have not achieved, you really aren't even in play, right?
Yeah.
So the answer is in database. So don't do that is the quick answer. But the way you actually implement it, like I could now, assuming I had all the authority and all this stuff to go into Bank of America, I could rename a column. in a production database, no problem at all, because I know how to do it.
Yeah.
And the way that you do it is you deprecate the old schema, you put the new schema in place, you put something in place to like a trigger, brute force it if you have to keep things up to date. And I could roll that change by the end of the day, right? Because it really is just, and even if I'm just typing, like let alone if I've got some tools to do it, right? So even if I'm just typing, I could build and test
it's a
that.
pattern.
It's a pattern, yeah. And it's a very well documented pattern. It's really easy to do if you've got the skills and if you've got the courage to do something like that, right? But it's like normal refactoring. Like it presumes you've got a regression test suite in place to identify what you broke. And then if you've got an automated regression test suite, that presumes you have some sort of CI strategy in place. If you've got some sort of CI strategy in place, you should probably have some sort of a continuous delivery or continuous deployment
and it
process.
presumes we understand the architecture and there aren't 10 other little applications running around with a connection string to that database.
Oh no, no. Well, so database refactoring. So that's the fundamental challenge with database refactoring is that coupling. I assume that that's the case. So when we wrote the refactored databases book, we did it under the assumption that there was 100 systems accessing that table. Yeah, so whatever it is that you were going to change, there's 100 things accessing it.
Yeah.
You have no control over 99 of them, right? They're totally out of your control. You might not even know they exist. And I would assume they don't know because there's always somebody that's written a spreadsheet that accesses the data. So like there's always something, right? Because summer students, love them, and so or Deloitte consultants, somebody's fooling around, guaranteed. So anyway, so you can't assume that well, first of all, you have to assume a bunch of stuff's accessing it. You can't assume the exact list. And even if you did, it wouldn't matter. You can't assume that you can update 100 things at once, and roll them at once. And if that's even remotely possible for you, okay, fine. I'll just up the number to 1,000 or 10,000, right? I'll just ratchet it up until it blows you away. It doesn't matter, right? So you got to assume that you're out of luck. You can still do it, and if the database is responsible for its own integrity. So, and that's it's got to keep the data up to date, regardless of the refactorings you've made. Now, eventually, you do have to you do want to update those apps. You do want to release them into production, and you do want to remove the cruft that you've added to keep everything up to date. So there's a little bit of work there to be done, but it's possible now, right? So you can safely refactor a database if you want to, and so why is this? Why am I harping on this? This is the fundamental skill you need to fix your data quality problems in your organization, right? Because all this other data cleansing stuff that like the data scientists do, at the point of usage, if you're cleansing data, that's better than doing nothing. But that's like a Band-Aid on a sucking chest wound. It's the wrong place to be fixing things.
Yeah.
You need to fix at the source, otherwise you're wasting your time. And you also need to fix whatever it is that's messing up your source to begin with. So there's a little bit of work to be done to clean up your technical debt.
Nice.
But you got to do it because that technical debt's just going to get worse.
That's a great point. And just on the specific example, sounds like the same mindset when updating public web services or even just a C# or Java interface, recognizing if it's an interface that's been shared at any time with any third party, you don't know how they're using it. And it's foolery to think that you can change it and nothing bad's going to happen. So you have to maintain the definition of that interface and make the change internally, have some type of adapter or shim so that original interface continues to function.
Yep. And you introduce whatever your new interface is, right? Because if you're evolving the interface, you got to keep the old one up and running. You got to put the new one in place. You deprecate the old one. And then that motivates, something throws a warning, it's annoying. So the coders know to fix it. And then they move to the next thing, to whatever the next version is. And this is the way you do it, right? And you leave it, you've got a deprecation period of months or years, depending on, how much coupling you're dealing with. But eventually you knock out the old stuff. Hopefully everybody updated their code. And, it never totally happens that way. But, enough that it's not painful. And if somebody does shoot themselves in the foot, you can say, well, dude, it's been 2.5 years.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
Come on.
Yet another people problem. So,
yeah. So, so anyway, so this is a proven technique. It's been around for years, widely accepted. except within the data community where it's still rocket science.
Yeah.
So we can do better. We have to do better. It's not a can thing anymore. It's like we have to do better. All the techniques are there. You just need to adopt them. And a lot of tools are there too, right? Like I was talking about hand jamming things. Yeah, that's like totally barbaric. But I could do it if I had to, right?
Right.
Because I can't assume you've bought the tools. Hopefully you do, but
Yeah.
if not, go shopping.
Well, Scott, this has been a fascinating discussion, and we kind of close up here. There's some really great points that you made. We'll include all the links to the things we talked about in the show notes. But thanks for coming on. As we kind of close up, how can folks learn more about you?
You can follow me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place. But I've got several sites that I maintain, scottambler.com, agiledata.org, agilemodeling.com. Those last two sites, I've been updating the material over the last year or so, and I'm going to spend most of this year doing major rework of a lot of key articles there. And then ambisoft.com, which is sort of my bucket of where everything else goes that doesn't fit into the other three sites. So it's a lot of weird esoteric topics on ambisoft.com.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on the show. This is a fascinating discussion, and I know the listeners enjoyed it as well. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. Always happy to come back if
absolutely. We'll book it.
Okay.
And until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.